The Channels 24 app means you'll always be in touch with the news. Get the latest local and international stories on the go. And there's our social media platforms for news from around the world. Watch the news live and play videos that matter to you. You can also check the eyewitness section to report events around you. Just click on the eyewitness icon and follow the instructions to upload your content. Channels 24 app, the news at your fingertips.
Reports so far received from across the states indicate clearly that voting exercise began on schedule, and so far there has not been any reason for complaints. We have some with us. Some arrests have been made in Osogbo here, and some arrests have been made in Ife. You see, so far we have taken adequate proactive measures to see that the criminal elements do not, of course, wear their ugly heads. The police, we've done our deployment, military have done their deployments, other services. You can see, as I told you earlier, what we are doing here is not a one-man show. It's not a one-man show. We have deployed personnel from all security agencies. We have deployed personnel from all law enforcement agencies. And you can see we are all going in synergy. We are all going as a team to all the points. We have all the voting points, all the polling booths. We will continue like this, at least to give advices, to check our men, see to it that they are doing what is proper.
Thank you so much, everyone, for staying with us right here on the Channels Television continued coverage of the Osun governorship election. Let's get some more perspective into all of this. But for a moment, focus on this. So I'm showing you a map of the horse race. We were saying it might be a 2-horse race, 3-horse race, but so far this is what we have as far as this election is concerned. But let's get some more insight into this election. I'm now being joined by a political counselor to the British, to the British ambassador, isn't it? High Commissioner in Abuja, Jonathan Bacon. Thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you, Shane. Very good to be here.
And Mr. Larry Arugundade is an IRAD analyst. Thank you so much, Mr. Arugundade, for coming in.
Thank you very much, Shane.
Appreciate it. Jonathan, what's your, you've been monitoring Nigerian elections and Nigeria's politics. From your own point of view and from the High Commission's point of view today, what are your initial, because the election is not over, what are your initial analyses?
Yeah, thanks, Shane. So I've been part of a team that's come from the High Commission to observe the elections. So we've had a team that we've deployed to the 3 senatorial districts. So we've been out all day observing the process and have had the chance afterwards to discuss and to share views. And so our role as observers is we're obviously neutral in this process. We're here to support democracy and to support a free, fair election, a transparent election, and that's what we've been doing. So initial reflections, I think, are actually very much in line with what you've heard from other people. So the turnout has appeared to be good in certainly in the places that we went to, and very peaceful. So we observed various polling stations, large turnout in some of them, a peaceful process. The BVAS technology seems to have worked very well in most places, and the process so far and the atmosphere has been very calm. So as part of our discussions before the election, we met with the security agencies. We also met with many of the candidates in the election and discussed with them. But the process so far seems to have been very calm. As others have mentioned, and I saw that the EFCC have picked up a few people. Our observers did notice some instances of what could potentially be vote buying, but that would, certainly wouldn't be occurring everywhere. And I know that you've mentioned that so far in your coverage already. But generally, as you say, the process is still ongoing. There isn't a final result. I know the results are being counted and collated. And our role as international observers is to just look at the process and see what's happening in order to support democracy and support free, fair and transparent elections. And so that's what we will continue to do as the results are being collated. So.
Interesting. Mr. Arugunade, what are your initial thoughts? We were discussing off the camera yesterday about the people of Osun State, their orientation, their worldview, the sociology of the people, the traders, the students, and all of that, and how they react to an election atmosphere. But is it alien or is it far from what you know? Did you see a different Osun people today?
Well, not necessarily. I think that what we've seen today, we've seen some level of enthusiasm on the part of the party faithfuls who went out, to vote. And to that extent, we can say that it reflects the trend that we were analyzing before now. Of course, it's when we have the overall results that we'll be able to then go to peculiarities or particulars of how, the voters, behaved. But even from the results that we've seen so far, I think to some extent they tally with possible projections of how the people were likely to vote. What I saw in a few areas that I went around in Uriade, for example, were the fact that very early in the morning a lot of people had come out, many of them quite young, who had been active in the campaigns. And they were already at those, polling booths very early in the morning. Some you had fairly large crowd, some larger crowd, maybe because we had 1 or 2 or 3 polling units in the same area. In some, there were very few people, but the presence of the police, were noticeable. And I also noticed that despite some form of hostility between those supporters, few days to the election, which, one witnessed, there was some kind of, camaraderie. I guess that the supporters of the different political parties realize that any disruption may cause them the chances of their candidates. Maybe they already have some feelers that we now have a new, electoral act in place, and things might be different in terms of your conduct. If, for example, you have a violent conduct in the polling unit, INEC under the new electoral act is empowered to take a decision on those results, could cancel them, and that could mean a lot, for the candidates. So possibly the candidates, spoke to their supporters to mind the way they conduct themselves, and we saw, evidence of that. So to that extent, although like I said, I went to a few areas, one, the projection is that we didn't really have electoral, violence, marring the process. What one would like to see is whether the increase in the number of registered voters would also translate into increase in the number of voters. Because, Osun has been one of the leading states when it comes to registration. We're talking about 1,992,000, close to 2 million registered, voters. And we also had a significant increase in PVCs collected when you compare 2018 with 2022. So we're now looking at a possibility that we might have, more voters. And hopefully, whether we would see a change in the trend of apathy that characterizes our elections. Because what we see over the period is that at the end of the day, fewer and fewer people, are voting. The issue of, I think, vote buying came up in our conversation, and it has come up today. And he did mention the fact that, the AFCC mentioned some arrests. But I think that we might not have seen a lot of vote buying on the election day today, but apparently, money got shared yesterday, to some of the, candidates. There's a sense in which people feel is part of our political culture. And what I really found a bit embarrassing is that even those who belong to these political parties, who knew they would still vote for their political parties, still felt the need to have, something, a kind of a sense of entitlement that, we need, to be settled. So we can't use the arrest on election day to actually judge the extent, of possible vote buying. But the positive we're looking at so far is the fact that, and I think that the earlier speakers mentioned is the early deployment of voting materials, the early arrival of the INEC officials at the polling booths, the fact that the voters' lists were conspicuously displayed, and you saw people, checking their names. If people didn't spend a long time voting, possibly some little time on the queue, but the deployment of technology helped the accreditation process, which was more or less simultaneous. You get accredited, and then you are ready to vote. So it's when you go back to queue that you possibly spend some time.
Sure. Let me bring back Jonathan into the conversation. What's your appraiser of the Nigerian political scene, if you look at the progression? Because I know the High Commission and the United States Embassy are always very interested. You are partners in also looking into what Nigeria, also you have organizations who are supporting the democratic process in Nigeria. So what's your appraiser of the progression in the last few elections in Nigeria? Now we have 2023 elections coming. Your appraiser so far?
Yeah, thank you. So we have deployed teams to the Anambra gubernatorial elections last year, then to Ekiti this year, and now to Osun. And I think also to pick up on something to mention there around the Electoral Act. I think with the new electoral law, which is coming in, which this election and the Ekiti election are being conducted in accordance with, was, I think, a significant development. And certainly, from our perspective,
Yeah, hello, everybody. So I'm streaming the results from the Osun State election, but I'm not able to host the interaction. So I've put the hyperlink in the comment section. If anybody wants to come on stream, especially an OG of the platform, if you want to come on stream, then I'll give you the handles to host the interaction. I'm happy to do that. Otherwise, we just listen to the streaming and end it there. But if you want an interaction, click on the hyperlink, and then I'll make one of you the host, and then you can coordinate the interaction. So back to it.
As observers of this and as supporters of Nigeria, the BVAS and the electronic transmission of voting, I think, are important moves forward. Obviously, this election is still ongoing to the extent that the results are being collated. But I think that certainly from what we saw today, with the process, with the role that INAC was playing, with the rollout of the BVAS, I think all of those things combined were very encouraging in terms of the process. And as I said, it was conducted, it was a big turnout, and it was very peaceful and very calm. So I think as observers who support democracy and free and fair elections, I think that certainly many of the things today were very encouraging in that regard.
Let's do some analysis, Larry.
Yeah.
So if you look at some of the results that are coming, so this is a segment where we're looking some of the candidates and how they've performed so far. And we'd like to inform our viewers that this is not the totality of the result as far as this local government is concerned. These are the results so far entered on our dashboard, and so far the results that have coming into the INEC portal. So if you look at it, for example, maybe we can take a closer look. Okay. So we've had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 turning green. It's a progression, and it might change, because if you look at it, it's looking very close. For example, you look at Osogbo, for example, you look at how close the race is going. They are in the region of the 4,000, the two major candidates that are going head-to-head in that.
I think in the region of 5,000.
5,000.
Yeah, 5,000.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. One is in the region of 5,000. One is still just about 4,000.
One is closer to 5,000 than the other.
Do you see this coming? It's not a totality of the result, but so far what we have entered, it's interesting. Oshogbo has always been APC.
It's interesting because if we look at previous elections, 2018, even 2014, Oshogbo had always voted en masse APC, and it's also one of the areas where you have the highest number of registered voters, and winning that state. In our analysis yesterday when we were discussing this, we're also talking about which areas will be battlegrounds and which one will not be battlegrounds. And incidentally, we mentioned, the state capital, partly because of the symbolism of it, to say that, oh, if I could be accepted in the state capital, then it might be trend. So there's a sense in which we probably didn't see these, Oshogbo coming, but then we still have to wait for all the results to come in to know if this particular trend would be maintained as far as Oshogbo is concerned, really. And of course, it's quite significant because, like I said, it's one of the areas where we do expect large votes to be cast in this particular election. And then so if we look at 2018, I think this is also interesting because the APC won part of Ede in 2018, but now we're seeing a different trend. But then we're looking at this number of votes, which may not reflect the total. But this is also an interesting result, because if this trend is maintained, then it might have some implication for the total votes, for the overall votes that will be cast, because we need to have at the back of our mind the conditions that would enable a candidate to emerge outright winner, having majority of all the votes, and also having majority of votes in at least 2/3 of the local governments. So if we're talking of 30 local governments, then it means that the candidate must win maybe more than 20 local governments. So we're looking at this emerging scenario, which is quite interesting. Now, it is the votes that will come from those other places in terms of number that will determine. So the thing about election, the tricky part of it is that you might really have large votes in some areas, but when the totality of the votes come in, then the situation, could change.
So that's Ife Central for you, Mr. Ogunade.
Yeah, Ife Central.
I mean, that's a stronghold of.
That has changed.
Former SDP candidate.
Yeah. So this to me, I think, was expected. Maybe the gap is what we can be looking at, because Senator Iyola Omishore, who was the PDP strongman in Ife, whether central or west, has since moved on and is now the national secretary of APC. So it's not totally surprising that APC is leading there. And in any case, it has always been, Ife has always been interesting. Even when you go back to the Second Republic, it's always been a strong contest between the, what you could call the, progressives and then the conservatives, and because one has to be mindful of the way we use nomenclature when it comes to political parties in Nigeria. But then from what we've seen so far too, it's still fairly close, because we're talking of 54%, and then 42%, and this trend, might really change.
This is not a final figure.
It is not the final. This is not the final. Exactly. These are not the final figure, but this is what we have seen, so far.
Mr. Arugunade, this is another one where the APC seems to be in there.
But then neck to neck. The question really is, this neck to neck race, are we going to have it replicated in all the the local government?
Another local government area. Well, it looks the same. The pattern is looking the same.
Yes, it looks the same. Now for Oriade, Oriade is part of the bigger Ijesha land, and what we might be looking at in this result is, to what extent has the conflicts between the former governor of the state who come from this area has possibly, shaped the voting, because we also realize that Oriade is one of the areas where some of the erstwhile leaders of the APC had moved on to PDP. And possibly that is having some implication in terms of the result that we're seeing so far, because these are not just the final results. And
Absolutely.
I think we need to keep emphasizing that.
Absolutely.
But then, if you look also at Oriade, one would expect this. Don't forget that if you look at the House of Representatives, for example, the current member of the House of Reps is from Oriades of the PDP. And you expect some strong showing in that area. So some of the trends we are seeing, in a way, I think kind of justifies the pre-analysis that we have made. Ejibo will be of great interest because Ejibo also have, Ejibo has very huge votes. And this is quite interesting, at least in terms of the gap that we're seeing in these particular elections. I think the percentage there now we're looking at 61% to 36%.
Yeah.
That's
so based on the result that we have entered.
That has been entered so far. And that is what we need to let our readers know, that this is not the totality of the votes cast. But we're just looking at the results that have so far been entered. And it's important because if you look at the what we have there are the total registered voters and not necessarily the total accredited voters. It's when we have those accredited voters that we can then begin to project probably more accurately as to likely winner, because we have to deal with those who were accredited and then those who voted for which party out of those that were accredited for this election.
All right.
But so far, interesting, and for close observers of Osun election, the question would be, are we headed to another 2018 where the winner was determined by less than 8,000 8,000 votes.
I mean, it's getting neck and neck, and things are really getting more interesting. The figures are showing us that if this trend continues, we may have a situation where it might be a very, very difficult election to call at the end of the day. But we're monitoring. This is not the entire picture.
Exactly.
This is not the total picture.
This is an election where we would wait to more or less the last second.
Absolutely. No, interesting. But I must sincerely thank you, Larry Arugundade, one of our ERAD analysts and liaison director of the International Press Institute. And of course, Jonathan Bacon is the political counselor of the British High Commission in Abuja. Thank you so much, Jonathan. It's good to see you again.
Thank you.
Mr. Arugundade, thank you so much. We'll be here for a long time.
I'm sure
but we need to take a break, everyone, probably a longer break. We'll go back to our normal programming on Channels Television, but do know that Channels Television right here, we're keeping you in the picture, in the know, in the front seat of what is happening as far as this election is concerned. Do stay with us, because not so long, we'll be right back on air with some of the figures, and they're coming in really, really fast. Thank you so much, everyone, for watching. We'll be back.
Thank you.